Daf Mem base, the top line with the two dots. There was a ship that was laden with wheat. It sank in the river Chisht. Rava permitted them to sell the wheat to the Nochrim. It was before Pesach, and there was a chashash that because it was soaked in the water, it would become chometz. But nevertheless, he allowed them to sell it to the Nochrim. And that we're not concerned that it will come into the hands of the Yidden. To the Yidden you can't because of chashash, because it was soaked in water, become chometz, but he allowed you to sell to the Nochrim. He asked them, Rava, how could you say that it's mutter to sell to the Nochrim? We learned in the Brisa, Beged Shaved B'Kalayim. If there was a Beged where there was Kalayim which was lost, what does that mean? Meaning there was a thread of a different mina and it made it Kalayim, but it was not identifiable. You couldn't recognize and see where it was. Meaning, as the way Taisus explains, if you would recognize, if you knew where it was, we wouldn't have a concern, because then it could be removed and then you could use the Beged. But you don't know where the Kalayim is. So, therefore, you can't wear the Beged, but additionally, you can't sell it to the Nochri either. Why is that? Because we're afraid that the Nochri will sell it to a Yid. And you can't use it as a saddle for a donkey. Now, really, strictly speaking, it should be mutter, because if it's a saddle for a donkey, it's not called levisha of kilayim. You're sitting on a hard substance. It's not over you, it's not covering you. You're sitting on a hard substance. It should be mutter. However, there is a concern that you'll now perhaps cut a piece of this saddle and make it use it as a patch, and then it would be considered part of a beged, and it has kalayim in it. So you can't sell it to a Nochri. Why is that? Because we're afraid that the Nochri will then sell it to a Yisrael. So you see, we are concerned by selling to a Nochri that he'll sell it to Yisrael. It'll end up in the hands of Yisrael. Similarly, over here, by the ship, we should also be concerned that how can you sell to the Nochri? It might end up in the hands of the Yisrael. Now, the Mishnah, the Brisa continues, you can't make a merdas l'chamor, but you could use it for the tachrichim, for the begodim, for the mace, because the mace itself is bottom in a mitzvah. The big day hames are asr b'hana. So there's no concern over here that you will now sell it to a goy who will now sell it to a yid, that will end up in the hands of a yid and he'll wear the kalayim, because it's also b'hana. So he won't sell it to a Yisrael, he won't sell it to a goy. It won't end up being a beged for a yid, so you don't have a concern. Taisus points out that normally we do say that loig larash, that we don't embarrass the mace. A mace is potem in a mitzvah, but we don't, for instance, have tzitzis in front of him, because it's an embarrassment that if the tzitzis drag over the kever, it's embarrassing the mace to say that he's not chayav b'mitzvahs. Now over here, how can we allow a beged of kilayim? Isn't that like l'rash? Isn't that showing that the mace is potter from the mitzvahs and he does not have the yisr of kilayim? Jesus says that it's specifically by tzitzis, which is shokol kol keneged kol mitzvahs kulam, that we apply this principle, but it would not apply over here. Al kopanim, what do we see over here? That you can't sell this beged to a Nochri. So the Nochri, my time aloi, why can you not sell it to a Nochri? La mishum dahara mazam Yisrael. Because you were afraid that he'll sell it to Yisrael. So here also, how can you say that we sell this wheat to the Nochri? Why aren't we concerned that he'll sell it to a Yisrael, and the Yisrael won't realize that it came into contact with water and there's a chashash chometz? Then he retracted and he agreed that there is this issue, there is this concern, and therefore he said, let him only sell it a small portion at a time to Yisrael, so that it will be consumed before Pesach, and therefore we're not concerned about chametz. But in large quantities it can't be sold, and it can't be sold even to a goy in large quantities. because of this concern. There's some discussion. He said, sell it to a Yisrael in small quantities. Can you sell it to a Goy in small quantities? So that's a discussion in the Mefarshim. Ton Rabbanan. It's customary to add flour to a pot that's cooking to make it thicker. But to add the flour to a pot on Pesach, you can't, because of chashash of chimutz, it might become chometz. Well, right, says Sheyimlol, if one wants to, what does he do? Noisan is a kemach. First he puts in kemach, and then immediately varkach noisan is a chometz, and then immediately thereafter he puts in the vinegar, and the vinegar will inhibit the chimutz process. The strength of the vinegar will inhibit the chimutz process, and therefore we're not concerned that it'll become chometz. Some say that you can even put the vinegar in first. Even if the vinegar was put in first, and therefore it got somewhat diluted before you put in the flour, it still hastens the cooking, it still cooks very quickly, and therefore it will inhibit the chimutz. Man Yeshayim, who is the Yeshayim? Amar Rav Chisda, Rabbi Yehudi. It's Rabbi Yehuda. This non we learned in the Mishnah in Shabbos. We learned ha'ilfas v'gader shavir merusach. If you have a frying pan or a pot which was removed from the fire, so it was boiling, it was cooking on the fire. You removed it from the fire, it's still boiling. It's a kli rishain. Lo yitin l'seichen tavan. You can't put spices into it because it's considered cooking, even though it's not on the fire, but it's still boiling, and it's a kli rishon. It will cook the spices. So lo yitin l'seichen tavan, v'al neis l'seich hakara. But if you put the contents into a bowl, or l'seich hatamchoi, and it's in the tureen, and then you put in the spices, meaning you're putting the spices into a bowl or a tureen, which is a klisheni, then it's mutter, because it's only a klisheni, and there's no bishul on a klisheni. But Rabbi Yehuda Omer, he said, look, kol hu noisen, you said you can put the spices into anything which is in a klisheni, chutz midavar sheyesh b'chayim v'tzir, unless it has vinegar or fish brine. Now, these things you can't put in because they cause cooking very easily and very quickly. So you see that Rabbi Yehuda holds that the vinegar, that the chometz, has the power to cook very quickly. It cooks even in a klisheni. And therefore, in our case as well, even if the vinegar is placed first, it will still have the power to cook quickly, and therefore there won't be any chimutz. Why don't you use that sign like Rav Yossi? Because we see also Rav Yossi holds similarly that vinegar has the power to inhibit chimutz. The Sanya we learned Rav Yossi Omer Shairan b'chaimetz. He says you can take the barley which you got bloated, you soak it in vinegar. B'chaimetz same sign, and the vinegar contracts it. It causes it to contract. And therefore, it seems that it is also will be enabled to inhibit the chimutz. Gemara says, no, we don't zet sign like Rabbi Yossi, because Kiyashmina Leila Rabbi Yossi, when do we see that Rabbi Yossi says that it has that power, Hani Miladi Zabaini? That's only if it's intact, it's not mixed in, it's not diluted. But we don't see that he says that even if it's in a mixture, even if it's been diluted, that it also has that power. Therefore, that sign rather like the case that the Tani is Rabbi Yehuda, that we see that even in a mixture, he also holds that it has that power to cause the cooking to cook very quickly, so it won't come to lay chimutz. Ula Omar says, he said in both ways, whether you put in the vinegar first or the vinegar add later, he says, in both cases, says it's also. We don't allow this. Why is that? Mishum lech lech amrina nazira. We say, go away, go away. We say to a nazir, go away, schor schor lekarma loisik, or go around, don't come into the camp, go into the vineyard. A nazir is also for wine. It's also for grapes. We tell the nazir, don't even come close to the vineyard. Here also, this, yes, even though theoretically the vinegar has that power, but we don't want to come into a situation where perhaps it's not done properly or carefully, etc. Stay away from it. Stay away, make a harachaka, and therefore we don't allow either way. We don't allow you to do it. Rapapi shoyalei lebudiki de Reish Galusa. Rapapi allowed the bakers of the Reish Galusa lemimchik der b'chasisi to thicken a pot of flour made with the oven dried grain. He allowed to thicken the pot to add the flour to it. Omar Rav Ika the Sharikai Milsa. Would anyone allow that to say this is mutter beduch tashchicha avde when slaves are common? If you're careful with it, then we would say that it could be with as chasisi, it would be mutter because it was oven dried and it would not come lidei chimutz. But you have to be careful with it, and avodim aren't so careful. Would there be anywhere we would allow them to rely on avodim to be careful with it? So therefore, it's not permitted. Ikadam Ravagufa Machalem Bikder Bechasisa, the Ram himself would thicken the pot with the grain made from, with the flour made from oven dried grain. That he himself said that it's mutter. Now, just in general terms, we learned previously about the ship that came into, that sank and therefore was soaked in water, and the issue of whether you can sell it to a nochri. And we say that in small quantities you can, but not in large quantities, or small quantities to a Yisrael, but not in large quantities because of the chashash of chimus. The Forshim asked the kasha, why is that a concern, according to Shmuel? According to Shmuel, we learned previously that it's only if it's split. If the grain is split, then we have a chashash of chimus. But if the grain is not split, then Shmuel holds we don't have to be concerned of chimus. Now, presumably over here, we're talking where it's not split. If it would be nicker, that there were a chimustic problem. So we're talking even where it did not split. So why is there concern? Rabbeinu Ephraim answers, he says that Shmuel's matter is only because it's being processed. So the continual activity of the processing of it, therefore, as long as it's not split, it won't come lidei chimus. But if it's just resting, it's just sitting and soaking, like the case we had over here, even if it's not split, Shmuel himself would also be maskim that there is a chashash of chimutz. Zok the Mishnah, ain't nice some chemical charaises. So we talked about flour. The Mishnah says you can't add flour to charaises. The charaises over here we're talking about is not the charaises of Seder night. It's a dip. It's a dip that was made with vinegar. So he says you can't add rather flour to charaises or to mustard on Pesach. And if you did, so you have to eat it immediately because we're afraid that it'll come lidei chimutz. And as the Rosh and the Ran explain over here, we're talking in a case where there is over here as well, there's water. There is in the mixture, because if it would not have water, then we were not concerned that it'll come lidei chimutz. But over here, it has water, it has vinegar, but you should not add the flour because it could come lidei chimutz. If it did, you have to eat it immediately before it has a chance to become chametz. But Ramir Oyser, he says no, even doing it immediately, it's still also, we are chayshish that it will become chametz. Ein mevashel a Pesach. And as far as the korban Pesach is concerned, you can't boil it, loy b'mashkin, and whether it's in liquids, loy b'mei peres, or fruit juices, you can't cook it. Torah said that the korban Pesach has to be eaten that sliesh, and so it can't be cooked. It can't be cooked whether it's water or even these other liquids. You cannot cook it. But you can baste it or dip it into them. As long as you don't cook in them, you can baste it or dip it. That would be mutter. The water used by a baker. So the water, he cools his hands. He has these baking and they had the hot oven, so he cools his hands in some water. That water that meitash mishal nachlam yishafcha, you have to pour it out because since his hands come into contact with the flour and the dough, etc., they put in water. There's a chashash of chimutz. You have to throw it out. You have to spill it out. Zok the Gemara Amarav Kahana Machlesa say chadl. This, the machlekes in the Mishnah, applies to the case. It applies to the case which you put flour in the mustard. I will say charaises, but if it's in the case of the charaises, divra kol yisaraf miyad. It has to be burned immediately. Natanya Namahachi, we learned the Brisa in Naisim Chemical Chareses. You can't put flour into the Chareses im Nosan Yisarf Miyad. If you did, it has to be burnt immediately. If it's in the mustard, then we have a machlekes. Ramer Omer Yisarf Miyad, Chomimim Yaechal Miyad. The Chom say you can eat it immediately. Ramer argues, he says, no, even here you have to burn it immediately. But nevertheless, we see that the machlekes is by the case of Chardal, Dafka in the case of Chardal. But in the case of the Chareses, there's no machlekes, and everyone agrees that in the case of the Chareses, it has to be Yisaref Miyad, it has to be burned immediately.